So now we always talk about the Greeks, the Romans, the Ionians, and how everybody came into Kemet to learn. How everybody came into Kemet to get the information, to learn from the ancient Egyptians, to learn about the mystery schools or what have you. What we have to understand is, one, if you had Romans and you had Greeks, and you had all these people coming into Kemet getting knowledge, we forget about the Africans that was already there. We forget about the black people that already existed, of course, in Africa, that prior to any European getting knowledge, these Africans must have already gotten the knowledge. They must have had already set up civilizations and had, knowledge prior to Europeans coming in. See, we only focus on Europeans, and we don't realize that, hey, yeah, Africans came into Kemet long before any European. Africans had the knowledge, they passed it down, they put up civilizations, and they had this information for a long time before any European ever touched it. In fact, they were teaching Europeans not just in Kemet, but other places in Africa. And you really have to understand that. Remember, I brought this up in a whole video on YouTube about the many hidden accomplishments of African people. So you got to go back and look and understand. Remember, when I was talking about all these great kingdoms, the Kerma kingdom, the kingdoms along the Swahili coast, and all these kingdoms that existed, for a long time. So now understand, it's not so much about the Moors civilizing the Europeans during the Dark Ages. The Moors did so much more than that. We don't have to really defend our position on this planet as far as, creating civilizations before Europeans. And that's the problem. We get into debates where a lot of Europeans want to say, well, we was here first. They want to claim Europe before we was even there. How was that possible? Now, as far as Spain, and of course, Spain is right there. Africa, North Africa right there. You got Spain right there. Kemet is right there. And you find a lot of Egyptian artifacts in Spain. As a matter of fact, you go to Morocco, you cross the Straits of Gibraltar, you end up in the Iberian Peninsula, which is a mountainous region of Portugal and Spain. So in that region is where they found the earliest example of written text in the whole Iberian Peninsula. And that was belonging to a cremation urn of Apophis, Pharaoh Apophis. Remember, Apophis was ruling on the throne during the second intermediate period of Kemet when the Hyksos was ruling. So they found, his urn, they found other Egyptian artifacts, they found bowl with his sister's name on it, and it's dated between 16 and 15 BCE, the 16th and 15th century BCE, excuse me. So we have that. Then you also have a lot of what they call necropolis. A necropolis is basically like an ancient cemetery. They found about 15 tombs with bodies and these alabaster vases with cartouches on them, and so much artifacts that's belonging to the ancient Egyptians. So that's dated between the 9th and the 7th century BCE. So you have all this information, all these artifacts, and there's so much information throughout the world that we find pertaining to African people or the ancient Egyptians, as far as our position in many different civilizations throughout the world. So we don't have to debate that. It's just so much controversies wrapped up in the Moors, which we're going to straighten out in this video. But it's a lot more history that goes with African people than a lot of people understand. That's before Kemet, during the time of Kemet, around the same time. And we put so much focus on Kemet that we forget about the rest of Africa and what was going on. If it wasn't for the Moors, Africans wouldn't have been enslaved by the Arabs, wouldn't have been enslaved by the Europeans. The Moors was traitors. There's just no way around that. And I wish it was any other way to put it, but that's the truth. But you got to understand what Moors. Now, it's a lot of confusion and deception surrounding the Moors, and it's the reason why. Now, Moor means black. Just no way around that. They're going to try to tell you when you look up Moor that Moor is what? Arab Muslims? Bullshit. There was black. Moor has always meant black. That's basically how they pertain to a learned African. That name was given to the Africans by Greeks, by Romans. Moor means black. And a Moor to the Romans and Greeks was basically a smart African. Plain and simple. An African that had knowledge of math, astrology, science, building, and what have you. They were called Moors. And the only reason why they try to couple it with the Arab Muslims is to establish a faulty timeline. To establish a faulty timeline so they could try to say that the Moors basically began with Islam, when Moors existed long before Islam. So you got to understand that. This is how they're basically trying to steal the North, as we're going to talk about. They're trying to steal North Africa. They're trying to make it as if Africans never stepped foot in North Africa, which is retarded. And you actually have, people who believe that Africans never existed in North Africa. And I just tell you how, scrambled a lot of people's brains are. You have a lot of, Italian, Spanish, Greek words that's pertaining to the Moors, that's pertaining to either darkness or black. You have Moorish, you have Moraz, you have Mora. You have a lot of words that means darkness or brunette, or has some kind of a word pertaining to black people. So you find these words all throughout the ancient world. We know about mulatto, when a black person mixes. All this pertains to the Moors. This is just how we can, just put in all this information in the direction of Moors being black Africans and not Muslims. It's just that simple. Were there Moorish Muslims? Of course, but this was later. And these are the traders. These are the ones that I'm talking about that traded. Before Islam, you had Moors who was just basically throughout Africa, who were smart, who were scientists, mathematicians, astrologers, what have you, who had knowledge that was teaching the Europeans, that was teaching the Persians that came in, or whoever came in and got information. Africa was the hub. It's just that simple. Africa was the hub. Everybody was coming into Africa during that time, and they was learning, of course, from African people. So you had some African people that had the knowledge and some didn't. Some regular Africans that was just, either growing up or just working. And you had the Moors. You had people who just knew and had this knowledge. These was the Moors. And long before these people who traded on us, you had already the established civilizations of smart African people who was referred to as Moors. There's just no way around it. So again, they're trying to interject Islam in there because this is the time where the Moors was on the side of the Europeans when they traded. And this is where they want this to stick out in history so you can basically separate the two. And you should separate the two, but you can't separate the fact that Moors mean black. Moor is black. And not all Moors was traders like these guys. And any Moor that you see that's practicing Islam is a traitor. Any Moor you see with that fez or that turban on their head is a traitor. It's just no way around that. Now, supposedly, you get the name Moors from Mauritania, or Mauritania, however you want to pronounce it. But Mauritania is basically the northern part of Morocco, stretching over to the northern part of Algeria. So these people was called the Morai by the Greeks, and the Romans called them the same thing, basically meaning, black, another one of those M words. So you have Mauritania. This is where you supposedly had these black people coming from. The natives there was black. And this is supposedly where the word Moor derives from. So then you have Saint Maurice. Saint Maurice, who was basically the patron saint of France, Switzerland. He basically was the leader of the Roman Theban Legion in the 3rd century AD, which the 3rd century, again, before Islam. So, again, Maurice is another Moorish name. This dude picture is everywhere and he is black. They don't change that because it's too much information that supports this dude being, a black, a Catholic. So, again, some stuff they just can't hide because there's too much proof out there. And it's because they can't hide these things. It's how we're able to piece together, these things, history, put the pieces together. Again, I don't just go by what the books say because the books lie or the books don't have the information correct. You got to be a critical researcher and look at things and say, this don't fit, because a lot of times it just don't fit. And when you try to make it fit, history is out of whack and it don't work. So you got to look at stuff and say, something that's not right. But the reason why we have this confusion is, again, because they're trying to steal Northern Africa. There's a lot of people who just don't want to give Africans credit for this knowledge. So by saying that they was Arabs, the Moors, when you start doing the research and seeing all the stuff that the Moors did, you would say, well, the Arabs were smart. Not understanding that it was the Moors, plain and simple. So you have a lot of deception going on there to where they just don't want to give us credit, and they just don't want to say that the Moors was black, plain and simple. Now we have Procropius, right? Procropius was a Byzantine scholar, back in the 6th century AD. He died, I believe, 565 AD, again, before Islam. Really important. Now, he wrote in his book, History of War, volume 4, page 323, talking about the Moors. He says, "But desert land, extending to a great distance, and that beyond that, there are men, not black-skinned like the Moors, but very white in body and fair-haired." Now, this is from a Byzantine scholar in the 6th century before Islam. So again, we can already establish from research that there's so many mentions of the Moors being black long before Islam. So when you Google the Moors and you see this whole Muslim, definition, we know that that's bogus, that's bullshit. Now, the number one reason they give for the Dark Ages, if you look it up and do the research, they'll tell you that, the reason why the Dark Ages happened is because Rome fell. The fall of Rome caused the Dark Ages. Now, the thing is, the fall of Rome was the rise of Rome. The fall of Rome, the fall of Europe, what brought about the Dark Ages was the rise of Rome and the rise of European powers, plain and simple. It's just no way around it. It was the rise, because you have to think about, one, how could Rome be fallen? And you got to look at the timeline again for the Dark Ages between 500 AD and 1000 AD. This is supposed to be the time span or the time frame of the Dark Ages. But when you look at between this time of what was going on in Rome, first of all, one, how could Rome fall into a Dark Age? How could the Dark Ages be caused because Rome fell, when during that time you had Rome fighting the long war between them, the Persians, and the Arabs? So if they fell during the 5th century AD or during the 6th century AD, and all the way up to, when they came out into the Renaissance, how could they be fighting these wars? How could they be establishing so much power and, setting up so many civilizations if they fell? Rome never fell. What fell was the African control of Rome and the rise of the European control of Rome. So it wasn't that Rome fell in the sense to where all Rome was done. It was the African rulership of Rome fell. Now, one of the things you got to realize is a lot of these countries was mixed race. You had, of course, as I was talking about in the beginning of the video, about how, white people started coming down. The Aryans started coming down. So you had the Aryans start coming down. I talked about this too in Buddhism DVD. The Aryans started coming down and mixing in. And the thing was, they was in Rome, they was mixing in a lot with the black rulers. They was rising in positions of power. That was the goal. So now when you get up to the point of Christianity, when Christianity comes into play and you have the Catholic Church starting, the whole Roman church and everything beginning in the 1st century AD, when all that was coming about, that was controlled by both black and white people. This is why when you have a lot of the Hebrew Israelites and a lot of Christians, when they want to say that the Bible is black and it's black, because when you go back and look at the research in Rome, you'll see that you have both control of Christianity under African powers and under European powers or white powers, both black and white people. But make no mistake, Rome was ruled by black people. This was, of course, the Roman Greek creation that they put in place and had basically, I guess, convinced the black leadership that this was the way to go. But it was both of them that basically was controlling the Roman Catholic Church during the 1st century. This is why you hear the rumors about the first pope being black, and people believe that Pope Victor I was black. Now, history will tell you, when you look this up, when you look at this time frame, it will tell you straight out that the Barbarians was the one who basically came into Rome and took over Rome. And conquered Rome and took it from the Romans. Now, as a matter of fact, if you look that up and you see, it says here in 476 CE, Romulus, the last of the Roman emperors in the West, was overthrown by the Germanic leader Odoacer, who became the first barbarian to rule in Rome. So, Rome had basically been established under Roman rulership for 1,000 years, it's saying. So you got to understand, and this is where critical thinking comes in, and you got to think about this. One, of course, the barbarians was white. The barbarians was Aryans. And when you got to understand, one, they was bred specifically for this reason, to conquer. They was bred to conquer. When you look at barbarians, they huge. They was bred for war, plain and simple. So one, you got to ask yourself, when the Romans fell, when the barbarians came in and took over Rome, why would they keep the name Rome? They kept the name. So you got to think about, one, usually when somebody conquers a land, they change the name immediately. There's no proof. There's no information that says that the barbarians came in and took the name. Two, if the barbarians came into Rome, and we all seen the barbarians, these big stupid brutes, if they came in and took over Rome, how did the Catholic Church survive? Plain and simple. So you got to think about, one, the name not changing. And we know the name Rome, it comes from Romulus and Remus. So remember, Romulus supposed to have killed his brother Remus and basically established Rome and named it after himself. This is like supposedly Greek mythology and what have you, what pertains to Rome. And this was like in the 8th century BCE. So, Rome been around for a long time. But of course, African people was there long before that. Again, history is written by the conquerors, not the conquered. So one, again, the name wasn't changed. Two, Rome stayed in power. How did Rome stay in power? How did the Catholic Church stay in power, I should say? The Pope. The papacy still was gone. Papacy still was ruling. Why would they allow that if these barbarians just came out of nowhere and took over? So that's basically critical thinking right there. You got to really think about that. Name wasn't changed. You have the papacy continuing and basically still taxing, still basically doing what they was doing. And when you pay attention, it was the church that was basically ruling. So if you overthrow in Rome, you overthrow in the church. It's just that simple. But again, it wasn't the overthrowing of, Rome. It wasn't, the Romans being kicked out and these barbarians basically establishing this new rulership. It was the taking of Rome away from African people. It's just that simple. And again, there's no way that this could have been going on when they fighting this whole war with the barbarians, that at the same time they still fighting this war with the Persians and Arabs. So you had Rome basically come in and take the whole northern part of Africa. Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. So where you have Alexandria, Egypt, still white people there to this day. All these people are Roman people. This is why when you go to Morocco and stuff like that, Algeria, you see the white skin looking people. They look white. And you say, well, this is Africa. What is these white people doing in there? They are mixed with Roman. They are a mix of Romans, Africans, and Arabs. Plain and simple. And these people are so ignorant. I can't even describe some of the stuff I've read from Moroccan people about African people because they are ignorant of their history and they don't understand. They think that, Morocco was theirs and it didn't never belong to African people, ignorant of the facts that, Africans was there long before them and they are Roman of Roman blood. Same thing in Spain. So you go to Spain and you say, well, Spain, but they're basically white people that speak Spanish. What is that? They're Romans. Understand the history. Romans, that's all they are. So when you understand, one, Spanish is one of the Romance languages or Romanance languages, however you want to pronounce it. You got Spanish, you have French, you have Italian, of course, or Latin or what have you. And the Romans speak Latin. What do we call these people? We call them Latinos. Plain and simple. Put it together. It's not no coincidence. They're the same people. You look at Puerto Ricans, they speak Spanish, just like in Spain, Spanish. It all goes together. So you got to understand what took place in the world and why certain people are in certain parts of the world, because they are of Roman blood and they conquered their way into these territories that was once African. So when you start putting all the pieces together, you can see why certain people are in certain places. Now, to play fair, you still have Romans. Romans did exist in Spain before then. If you go back, you had Romans in Spain in the 3rd century BCE when it was called the Hispania. This is where you get, the Hispanics. Hispanics. Hispania is what they call the Iberian Peninsula. So it all ties in together. So you do have a history of Romans in Spain, 3rd century BCE, long before then. But of course, African people was there before that. Also, you have Romans that was in Liberia, same time. So you got to understand, again, as I said, when you go back and look, even the Egyptians show you themselves that citizens of Egypt, some of them was white. When you go back during that history, 3rd century BCE, you had Romans, remember, Rome, 8th century or 7th century BCE established, so you still have Romans around that time. But you had them in Spain with the Africans, and they had took some of that land that the Africans, of course, took back. It wasn't like a war, but it was just like they came into a space that wasn't theirs, but the Africans let them stay. Same thing in Libya when they came into Libya, and they coexisted for hundreds of years. It's just that simple. They coexisted for hundreds of years. So when you're looking at the Egyptians talking about white people being citizens of Egypt, that's why they was coming into Egypt. They was learning. When the Romans admit themselves that they was coming into Egypt and learning, they're not talking about they came all the way from Rome. They was already there. They was in Spain. They was in Libya, which is right next to Egypt. And they was coming in. They was coexisting with the Africans for a while. And this is how they, the Africans was teaching them and they was learning and what have you. There was no problems at that time until whoever, at the top had aspirations for, domination. So, right around this time when you have Ferdinand and Isabella on the throne, our guy, good old Christopher Columbus, who didn't discover shit. Christopher Columbus, believe it or not, was inside the Alhambra castle that the Moors built, getting the blessing from Queen Isabella and Ferdinand to basically go and do what he was doing. Now, make no mistake, Columbus was a Roman. He was a Roman. He was just under the control of Spaniards, who was basically Romans, as I said. But he was a Roman. So he got the blessing to basically go out and do what he was doing. And on that ship, he had Moors.